Good afternoon. Today, it's important to learn about the following. 6 people were injured after a drone attack by the Russian Federation's military on Mykolaiv. According to the head of the Regional Military Administration, Vitaly Kim, 3 of the victims are in serious condition. All of them are receiving the necessary medical assistance. Kim also reported that earlier there had been Shahed drone strikes recorded in the region. Information about the destruction and possible casualties is being clarified. Ukraine is facing a very difficult situation in Pokrovsk. After months of fierce fighting, Russian troops are trying to gain control of the city. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy stated this in an interview with Bloomberg. He emphasized that he will support any decision made by the military commanders who are directly on the ground.
I will support our soldiers, especially the commanders who are there, and in how they're managing the situation. The most important thing for us is our soldiers. Russia is aiming for victory in Pokrovsk in order to try to convince Trump that Ukraine should withdraw from all of eastern Donbass, which consists of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions, to end the war. But we cannot abandon eastern Ukraine. No one will understand that. People won't understand that. And most importantly, no one can guarantee you that if they capture one city or another, they won't move further. Volodymyr Zelenskyy, president of Ukraine, in an interview with Bloomberg Television.
In the past 24 hours, 226 combat clashes were recorded on the front line. This was reported by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. There were 18 battles in the southern Slobozhansky direction. Near Kostiantynivka, Ukrainian defenders repelled 24 assaults, and on the Roman sector, 32. The hottest spot on the front remains the Pokrovsk direction. There, Russian occupiers made more than 80 attempts to break through the front line. Another 1,180 Russian occupiers were eliminated by Ukraine's defense forces on the front line over the past day. Thus, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the total combat losses of the Russian army since the start of the full-scale invasion have already exceeded 1,155,000 soldiers. In addition, Ukrainian fighters destroyed 11 armored vehicles. 2 air defense systems shot down 141 operational tactical UAVs and destroyed 90 units of enemy vehicles and special equipment. The defense forces struck a number of important Russian targets, using in particular Ukrainian-made long-range weapons such as Flamingo, Bars, and Luti. This was reported by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. So, in particular, during the occupation, in occupied Crimea, there were hits on the warehouses of the Feodosia Marine Oil Terminal, a helicopter parking area, and a drone launch pad at the Kirovsky airfield, as well as an air defense radar station near Yevpatoria. And in the Zaporizhia region, an oil depot near Berdyansk was hit, as well as command posts of the 5th Combined Arms Army of the Russian Federation and the 127th Motorized Rifle Division of the Russian occupiers. In 5 years, Russia may start a major war in Europe. This was stated by the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, who emphasized that more pressure needs to be put on Russia. Given the situation on the battlefield, there is no sign that Russia intends to stop. According to Zelenskyy, the Russians are ramping up their production and, by Ukrainian estimates, want to continue the war.
I believe we need to think about how to stop them now, in Ukraine. We also need to do everything possible to reduce their capabilities, not give them money, which they can still get from energy resources, and not give them weapons. So this is a problem we need to think through. Volodymyr Zelenskyy, president of Ukraine, on Telegram.
Meanwhile, during a working trip to the Zaporizhia region, Volodymyr Zelenskyy held a security meeting with the military command. They discussed, in particular, air defense of roads, logistics, and critical infrastructure. They also discussed strengthening engineering structures in the Stepnohirsk direction and the evacuation of local residents. In addition, the president met with soldiers of the 17th Army Corps and presented them with state awards. Ukraine's international borders cannot be changed by force, and an immediate ceasefire is a necessary condition for stabilizing the situation on the battlefield. This was stated in the final declaration of the G7 foreign ministers, whose meeting took place in Canada. The summit was also attended by Ukraine's foreign minister, Andriy Sybiha. The participants reaffirmed their unwavering support for Kyiv and defending its own territory against Russian aggression. The group of 7 countries are also considering using frozen Russian assets to support Ukraine and its defense needs. Sabia emphasized that the main goal is to make the cost of war unbearable for Putin. In addition, the minister held a number of meetings with the foreign ministers of Japan, India, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, as well as with the president of the World Congress of Ukrainians. With the Japanese colleague in particular, they discussed the energy situation in Ukraine, Russian terror, a ceasefire, and achieving peace.
Japan is our leading partner in Asia. We are grateful to the Japanese government and people for their steadfast support of Ukraine, including in the areas of demining and reconstruction. I informed them about Russia's terror against our energy system and shared a list of priority energy needs ahead of the winter. I invited Toshimitsu Motegi to visit Ukraine at the earliest convenient time. Andrea Sabiha, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, on the social network X.
The joint military aid package for Ukraine, worth $500 million, will be funded by Denmark, Estonia, Finland, Iceland, Latvia, Lithuania, Norway, and Sweden. Equipment and ammunition will be purchased from the United States as part of NATO's List of Ukraine's Priority Needs initiative. This was reported by the Alliance's press service. Secretary General Mark Rutte. He welcomed the partners' decision, noting that this equipment is extremely important as Ukraine is entering the winter months and any assistance will be needed on the battlefield. The United States plans to test nuclear weapons delivery systems. This was stated by U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio. He noted that the plan of U.S. President Donald Trump includes tests of technologies used to launch nuclear weapons from land, air, and sea. Earlier, U.S. Secretary of Energy Chris Wright stated that the tests will not involve nuclear explosions. Rubio's statement came amid reports of Russian tests of the intercontinental missile Burevestnik and the Poseidon underwater vehicle with nuclear power units. The longest government shutdown in U.S. history has ended. President Donald Trump has signed a bill to fund the federal government. However, the document that was passed is a compromise, as it provides for temporary funding until January 30th of next year. That means Congress will have to return to budget negotiations again at the end of January. The record-breaking U.S. government shutdown began on October 1st and lasted 43 days.
My signature, the federal government will resume its normal operations. My administration and our partners in Congress will continue to work to lower the cost of living, restore public safety, grow the economy, and return America to a place where all Americans can afford to live. I am honored to sign this incredible bill into law and get our country back on track.
Ukraine received a new tranche from the European Union in the amount of 5.9 billion euros. These are funds from the income of frozen assets of the Russian Federation. This was announced today by the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. As noted by the Ministry of Finance of Ukraine, funds received under the Aerolons and Ukraine Facility programs will be used for priority expenditures of the state budget. We are talking about the social and defense spheres, as well as the reconstruction of the country. President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, emphasized the importance of support for Ukraine from its partners. It is important that the ERA loans mechanism is funded from the income of frozen Russian assets, which already makes Russia pay for its aggression. Only pressure can work for the sake of peace, and that is why we must intensify our efforts to use Russian assets. We are really counting on a prompt political decision regarding the reparations loan and the full use of these funds to defend Ukraine. Volodymyr Zelenskyy, president of Ukraine, on Telegram. For details about the new tranche allocated to Ukraine by the European Union from the frozen assets of the Russian Federation, we will ask Vitaly Sizov, the special correspondent of Freedom TV channel in Europe. He is in direct contact with us from Brussels. Greetings, Vitaly. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, Katerina. Yes, indeed. Today, the outlines and options of how the European Union intends to provide Ukraine with this long-term credit Today, the finance and economy ministers of the European Union member states met here, and almost simultaneously with the start of their meeting, the president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, was speaking at the European Parliament not far from the Council of the European Union. She presented three main possible ways to support Ukraine over the next 2 years. Let me remind you that in October, the leaders of the European Union and the leaders of the EU member states agreed that they would help Ukraine meet its financial needs for the next 2 years and asked the European Commission to provide possible options for this assistance, which is essentially what Ursula von der Leyen publicly did today. We have her direct speech. We will, without a doubt, fulfill our commitments and cover Ukraine's financial needs for the next 2 years. Right now, the discussion's about how to do this. The first option is to use budgetary resources to raise funds on the capital markets. The second option is to conclude an intergovernmental agreement under which the member states would independently raise the necessary capital. The third option is a reparations-based loan backed by mobilized Russian assets. We provide Ukraine with a loan which Ukraine repays if Russia pays reparations. This is the most effective way to support Ukraine's defense capability and its economy, and it's the clearest way to show Russia that time is not on its side. The finance ministers of the European Union believe that the idea of a reparations-based loan at Russia's expense is the most appropriate solution under the current circumstances, because they do not want to increase the burden on their national budgets. And most importantly, many of them emphasize and strongly state that it is absolutely necessary to guarantee and uphold the fundamental principle that Russia will, without exception, pay for everything that it has destroyed. Also, a number of ministers stated that there is no need to pay attention to Russia's threats against the European Union as a whole and against Belgium, which holds the largest amount of frozen Russian assets. Let me remind you that just yesterday, Russia's foreign intelligence made a statement and tried to scare Belgium with some kind of dire consequences if it approves this decision to provide Ukraine with a long-term loan. Denmark's Minister of Economy, Stephanie Loos, called on people not to pay attention to such threats.
I think it's important to remember that the European Union as a whole is in a situation of hybrid war with Russia, and any one of us could be under threat any day and under any circumstances. For example, many countries have faced the appearance of drones in their airspace. Honestly, I think this is the new normal, and we shouldn't let instances where we are exposed to Russian hybrid warfare scare us or delay real support for Ukraine.
About the European Union. Today, the annual dialogue between the ministers of the European Union and the ministers of the European Free Trade Association took place here. These are countries like Norway, Iceland, Liechtenstein, and Switzerland. Norway's Minister of Economy, Jens Stoltenberg, also took part in this meeting. Let me remind you, this person led for a long time NATO, the North Atlantic Alliance. He is very familiar with the situation in Ukraine, with how aid is provided to the country and how this assistance is organized. The day before, he held a meeting with the European Commissioner for Economy, Valdis Dombrovskis. According to Stoltenberg, this year, Norway will provide Ukraine with more than 7 billion euros in aid, and there are very few countries that are providing aid at the same level if you take into account their budget and their gross domestic product per capita. According to him, the European Union has not yet asked him to support the credit program for Ukraine, and nevertheless, he stated that Norway will continue to support the Ukrainian armed forces.
I informed him that this year, Norway has tripled its military support for Ukraine, and of course, he welcomed that. I also raised this issue today with some ministers, but the commissioner also made it clear that the EU does not plan to ask Norway to participate in this credit program. What matters is that we support Ukraine, and Norway is providing direct support to it. It's difficult to form any definite opinion about the EU's credit program. We haven't seen it because the EU hasn't made a decision yet. But the commissioner's message was that the EU does not plan to ask any country outside the European Union to participate in this credit program.
Why is Norway's position so important? At the present moment, its oil and gas sector is experiencing significant growth, and it has very large reserves of these important resources. It collects the money earned from selling oil and gas into a special fund, and there have been several media reports suggesting that this fund might also somehow participate in providing the credit. For now, the situation is that the European Union is not planning to involve Norway, but it's worth noting that Jens Stoltenberg also did not categorically rule out the possibility of such participation in the future. He only said that it's necessary to see the scheme by which Ukraine will be financed. As you already mentioned at the beginning of my segment, the European Union is not forgetting about support for this year, and indeed, today the European Commission announced that Ukraine will receive almost 6 billion euros to support its budget this year. Speaking about the reparations loan, of course, it's worth remembering that it is covered by frozen Russian assets, and, as I mentioned, Belgium holds the largest share of these, about 180 billion euros. Right now, the main issue is persuading Belgium to support this idea. Naturally, Belgium isn't a very large country, and it would like other European Union countries to share legal responsibility with it, providing guarantees that it won't be left alone if any unforeseen circumstances arise. Let me remind you that, according to Ukraine's allies, such as Finland and Sweden, Ukraine will need additional funding as early as the second quarter of 2026, and they estimate these financial needs over 2 years to be about 140 billion euros. The discussion is ongoing, but we can see that it is already moving forward, and we are already seeing options that could provide funding for Ukraine. We're waiting for the development of this discussion, and naturally, the next meetings of the European Union leaders in December, where they are already supposed, or at least planned, to consider a finalized proposal on this issue. Katerina?
This meeting will take place literally on December 11th through 12th, so in just about a month. Vitaly, thank you. We were joined live from Brussels by Vitaly Sizov, the special correspondent of Freedom TV channel in Europe. He spoke about the new tranche for Ukraine from the European Union in the amount of 6 billion euros. This is money from the income of frozen Russian assets. Federation. Ukraine plans to spend the frozen Russian assets on producing its own weapons and purchasing air defense systems through the EU. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy stated this in an interview with Bloomberg Television. He also noted that transferring Russian assets to Ukraine would be a blow to the inner circle of Russian leader Vladimir Putin.
By producing in Ukraine, we will receive a certain package from the EU, including air defense systems. It's not just defensive weapons. We will buy missiles and air defense systems to protect our energy sector and other areas. If we are able to get these 140 to 160 billion euros, it will be a huge loss for Putin and the people in his circle, and that's why it will really destabilize their system. Volodymyr Zelenskyy, president of Ukraine, in an interview with Bloomberg Television.
Subscribe to The Gaze and stay updated on the most important events, top news from Ukraine and all over the world, in-depth analysis, exclusive reports and interviews, all on hand in our channel. Join our community of viewers and stay tuned.